Very few cars have generated quite as much buzz as the new PROTON eMAS 5, no doubt as a result of its tremendously long teaser campaign. So today we are here at the test track at PROTON in Shah Alam in order to put Malaysia's most affordable EV through its paces. So now, on the test track, we are sampling the eMAS 5 in terms of its high-speed stability, and it does certainly feel like this car is relatively planted. For something that is quite small, I'm surprised that the eMAS 5 seems to display a certain degree of sure-footedness, which is not something that you would necessarily expect from a compact city car. Now, this car has a claimed top speed of about 140 kilometers an hour, but honestly that doesn't really matter because it's a city car. 110, 120 is more than you'll ever really need. 140 is the sort of number you'll only really reach if you're overtaking. So the fact that this car only does 140 is perfectly fine to me. The more important part is the speeds that you do achieve, the realistic speeds that you do achieve, are achieved in a very stable and safe manner. Now, of course, the eMAS 5 is rear-wheel drive, which also means that this car benefits from a 5-point multi-link rear suspension setup. Now, this also provides and aids this car in terms of its overall stability, particularly at higher speed, because it allows the car to figure out the geometry of the wheels a little bit better and settle it down a little bit better, particularly when you're driving through corners. The other benefit of this car being an electric car is that those batteries are mounted underneath the floor, giving this car a nice low center of gravity. This, of course, means that at higher speeds, it also feels like the car is more planted, more stable, and when you're in the corners, it doesn't feel like there's a weight shift moving about as the car changes direction. Now, as we're doing about 100 kilometers now on this test track, wind noise is very well managed, but road noise is relatively present, no doubt as a result of this car running on Linglong tires, which means that the road noise could probably be improved by a set of higher quality tires, should that be a concern for you. That said, however, I have noticed that once the speeds creep past 120 kilometers an hour, which is safe for us to do here on this closed test track, that's when the wind and road noise becomes especially pronounced. And it is at that point that I feel that this car no longer seems to maintain that serenity. But doing 90 to 100 as we are now, this is considerably quieter than other vehicles sort of within the 60 to 80,000 ringgit space, and so I do think that this car will provide a pretty interesting proposition once it arrives. So now let's do an acceleration test in the eMAS 5. Now, this car obviously is not really going to be known for its performance. It's not exactly the fastest car in the world, but here they want to demonstrate how the car accelerates from 0 to 100 and then to see how this car decelerates from 100 back to 0. So, in 3, 2, 1, hit it! 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and brake. Okay, two things. Firstly, because this is an electric car, the torque in this car is pretty good in terms of how quickly it picks up speed and how quickly it builds that speed. I also appreciate the fact that because this car has a very balanced weight distribution, and also as a result of that very low center of gravity being an EV, even under heavy braking, the car doesn't seem to squirrel away under braking. It feels very stable. The car continues to track straight, perfectly straight, which is exactly what you want to see from a vehicle like this, particularly if you're driving about in town and you might find the need to suddenly come to a halt. Now we're coming up to a slalom test, which is quite tight, in order to demonstrate this car's maneuverability, and then that will lead us into a figure-of-8 test in order to demonstrate this car's sub 5 meter turning radius. Because this car is rear-wheel driven, it means that there is nothing between the front wheels in order to limit this car's tighter turning radius, and so this car does offer a full turning circle of less than 5 meters, which is very impressive for a city car. Now, the other thing that PROTON is keen to point out is the fact that despite this very tight turning radius, it doesn't seem to have compromised its overall maneuverability, because right now, even at driving at relatively higher driving speeds, it certainly doesn't feel like there's any compromise in terms of the way this car manages itself in order to go through a slalom test. So just to demonstrate this again, yeah, that's really not that bad. This car feels perfectly stable, perfectly reasonable in terms of what it's able to do. Now we're going to go through the figure of 8 test in order to demonstrate this car's turning radius, as I've mentioned several times at this point. And the fact that this car is able to turn at such a relatively tight radius should be pretty useful when you're trying to navigate city streets. That is the benefit of this car being rear-wheel driven, that there's nothing between those front wheels, and so they can turn at a very tight angle. And because this car is rear-wheel driven, when you do sort of kick it, it does slide a little bit, which is kind of fun, but not relevant. And now let's move to the staggered gate, where we'll do and demonstrate rather this car's high speed stability, or higher speed stability, because obviously being on a test track, we're limited to about 50 kilometers an hour at most, but we don't have an instructor in the car, so we might just be a little bit truant. Let's play around with this. I might get a letter from Proton for abusing their test track after this, but never mind. So the staggered gate test is in order to demonstrate this car's high speed agility. Because this car has a multi-link rear suspension, it should also mean that this car remains more stable, as it's able to push wheels onto the ground and maintain traction at all times. And more importantly, Proton is making a lot of promises about this car's stability, particularly at higher speed, as not to underestimate it as just a city car. And so this is a pretty important test. So as we come up to the first gate, we were told to do this at about 40 kilometers an hour, but I'm going to do it at 50. 3, 2, 1, go. Put that in sport mode just for the hell of it. Okay. This... Alright, it's quite clear to me that these tires are the weakest link here, because the suspension setup is actually not that bad. For a car that is relatively small and it's supposed to err on the side of comfort, I think that the body control is relatively well managed, and at no point did it feel like the wheels were coming off the ground, which is actually something that happens quite often when you throw around a car within this segment, or within this size category at least. However, these Linglong tires do seem to be struggling to maintain that traction, because I know that I've thrown cars around this course many times, and using the Continental tires that Proton likes to use on its SUVs and so on and so forth, you just get a little bit better performance out of them. Whereas these Linglong tires, I think even chucking this car around at about 40 kilometers an hour, it's just really struggling to keep up. And the traction control is having to do a lot of work in order to keep this car on the straight and narrow. It's just... I would most certainly advise swapping the tires into something with slightly softer compounds, such as Continental Ultra Contact tires, or I think in this category it would be Eco Contact tires, where you would enjoy slightly better grip both in the wet and in the dry, and also there should be slightly less noise as you're rolling about as a result of that softer compound. But I think our little naughty testing there, outside of the regulations set by Proton for their test track, has at least demonstrated the fact that even on the limit, this car remains relatively controllable. The traction control likes to intervene quite aggressively, which I think is to be expected for what is ultimately going to be a city car. This is the sort of thing that will be driven by, first-time drivers, students, younger adults, people without that much driving experience. And so for these individuals, it's important to have a car that feels very predictable for them. And I think that the fact that this car is so predictable at the limit is important, because I think that is what's ultimately going to make this car more appealing to a wider set of drivers and buyers. So after all of that, the conclusion of this car is very simple. It is very stable, very quiet, and very comfortable. And even when driven on the limit, it remains very predictable and very stable, and the sort of car that I think a lot of people will be able to get along with. However, for the estimated price of between 60 to 80,000 ringgit, my bigger concern is whether or not the wider public will be impressed by a range of just 325 kilometers on the WLTP cycle. No doubt that will be more than enough for most people, but if you could have more, why wouldn't you get that? In any case, we'll have to wait for this car to launch for us to fully understand what it is that we're dealing with, but ultimately that concludes our media preview of the new PROTON eMAS 5. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and please enjoy what might be the final shots you will ever see of the PROTON test track here in Shah Alam.